In a world where Twitter leads the headlines and the 24-hour news cycle forces people to choose sides, we're here to help you cut through the noise and discover that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Hosted by entrepreneur, author, public speaker, and regular media contributor Seth Denson. Subscribe, share, rank, and review. Welcome to Somewhere in the Middle on the Real News Communication Network.
Big thanks to Andy Meadows for that wonderful introduction, as always. Welcome back, everybody. It's Monday. You are somewhere in the middle. I am your host, Seth Denson, joined, as always, by the ever-intelligent and brilliant Mr. Apple Zackintosh himself.
Seth, how's it going?
Good, Zach. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. You know, I keep thinking eventually you're going to introduce the ever-intelligent Andrew Clark first before me.
I got something special for Andrew.
It'll happen one day, yeah.
Yes. Well, Zach's in booth and in studio, obviously, is the utmost of intelligent.
Ooh.
Ellsworth. We call him Andy, the California conservative himself, Clark.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Are there any more adjectives we could use on this?
No, but no one calls me Andy. It's a terrible name.
Do you prefer Ellsworth?
Clark's flat out over that.
I do have to ask. Ellsworth.
That
family name?
Dutch, yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
You need like a third after that, though. It should be Andrew Ellsworth Clark the third.
The third.
Right?
Would you do that harm to another child after this? Because I'm not keeping this trend going.
I like it personally. It's unique, buddy. I love it.
Thanks.
And it fits your personality so well. You look like an Ellsworth.
I'm quiet.
If you're watching versus just listening and downloading the podcast, Andrew graces us every week with these wonderful vest tie. You know, do yourself a favor, get on YouTube, Facebook at some point, actually watch the podcast versus just listen to it, and you'll get to see a little bit more about
It's not a bad look. It's okay. I wish I had vests I could wear, but I think the bigger you are, the worse vest look, personally, but that's just me.
Well, thank you.
Why I don't wear vests. Right? Hey, listen, I gotta tell you, man, I've this is show 10? Is this right?
I think so, yeah. I think we're officially on the double digits.
That's awesome. And of all the shows I've done, this may be the one I'm most excited about. And here's why. So as a show starts to get its identity, and we start to think through what we're all about and the message that we're trying to put forth, and, you know, as we've said multiple times, our show is not about taking a political position and screaming over each other to do just that. It is about trying to have a real conversation. And that by having a real conversation, we can get to a place, hopefully sometime, where we start to move the needle and we start to potentially change things and even potentially change the world. And it all starts with a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And listening, not talking, right? Being part of it. And so I had this idea that what if we started to bring in people that were changing the world in their own way? Because I think sometimes what we do is we think that to change the world, we have to run for political office or write a book or get on whatever stage we can with the loudest microphone and vocalize our desire and need for change. When in reality, we can change the world by just changing the lives of one person. That's all it starts, right? That's where it starts, is doing good for somebody else. So last week, Andrew very nicely commented on my very nice suit and tie and cufflinks.
It was a sharp look.
And I mentioned my one of my best friends in the world, Floyd Stanley, and his wife, Tamara. Now, I mentioned that these were folks that had decided one day that they wanted to be those world changers, but not in a way that would bring them spotlight or, as we'll talk about here in a minute, maybe even warm water to take a shower in, but to improve the lives of others. And they just made the decision that they were going to start doing just that. And they moved to Uganda and started a school and really have started impacting the lives of others there. And once they felt that their time was done there, that they had set the stage for success, they said, where can we go next? And they went to Cambodia. And now they're there. And I was commenting on that because the tie that I was given to me by Floyd and Tamara. And I said, I got to have them on the show at some point. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Floyd was on a plane to the United States.
Really?
Or maybe he had just gotten here. I don't know. But he was here to take, and we'll talk about this in a minute. He was here to take his daughter to college. His daughter's going to college in New York, and so he came back to surprise his daughter and drive her to college. And I found out about this, and I went, "Are you coming back to Texas by any chance?" He said, "Yeah, but I'm not going to have any time." I said, "Please, can you make some time?" And we are absolutely graced to have here in studio with us Floyd Stanley.
Happy to be here. It's an unexpected pleasure to be able to join this experience that I've been watching and listening to for the last several weeks. And if I can just say about your name, I think if you can follow it with an Esquire, if you can get that attorney label Esquire, it fixes everything. So if you can consider that for your child, you might be able to keep the name.
There's the nugget right
there.
There
It is.
It's Esquire.
The wheels are turning.
That or knighthood.
So one of the things that I want to start doing with the show is not just always talk politics or where we can come together in the middle on things and what's going on, but actually talk to people who are making a difference in the lives of others all over the world in some way, shape, or form. And so we're going to start doing some segments periodically where we're going to talk about world changers. We're going to talk about people that are actually doing it. We're going to bring them in and we're going to interview them and allow our show to be a bit of a platform to tell their story about what they're doing. And obviously through that, we can still have a conversation about what's going on here in the United States and across the world and still continue our conversation about what it means to be somewhere in the middle and where we are in the middle on things. And I do have some things I definitely want to talk about today. I mean, in this past week, U.S. politics has been just at this new level of what is going on with what happened with Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen and now Rudy Giuliani talking about versions of truth and, Alex Jones getting kicked off of YouTube and Twitter and of all people, Bill Maher coming out to defend his right to have a voice and the left crucifying their own and Bill Maher for doing that. It has been this chaotic week of politics. And so we would have more than enough stuff to fill the show up, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. All that stuff is garbage. And we'll talk about some of how that's going to impact us and the United States and the world. But really what I want to do is understand what is going on. And can we start to have real conversations about all of this? But before we get to that, I just want to visit with you, Floyd. I haven't seen you. And it's been...
let's see. This is August, so it's been 8 months.
Yeah,
since we left to Cambodia.
So let's talk a little bit about I'd love our listeners to hear a little bit about your journey. So before Uganda was ever in the headlights, now in the rearview mirror, and Cambodia gets into the headlights. Tell us a little bit about what your life was like.
So I was a guy who worked in several management positions. I had no desire whatsoever to travel outside of the continental United States. I wouldn't vacation outside of the United States. I had a pretty significant concern that if I left the U.S., my head might not return on its shoulders, just based on just the chaos of my perception of the world at the time. And my wife really wanted to travel, and when they wanted to do things, different kinds of mission work and that kind of stuff, and I would be the guy kind of waving at the door saying, "You guys have a good time," as I went on and did my own thing. And I was sitting in church one day, and our missions pastor got up and talked about this first-time trip they were going to do to Uganda. They were going to take a worship team, and they were going to plant churches and do medical crusade, medical dentistry work and that kind of thing. And I just felt this overwhelming need that I felt like I had to go to Uganda. And I leaned over to my wife and I said, "Tamara, I think I have to go to Uganda." And her response was, "You realize that's not in the U.S., right?"
That's not Uganda,
Texas.
It's
not Uganda, Texas. And so I actually went to Uganda my first time, having no idea really why I was going, just going off of this feeling like I needed to go, or I was supposed to go. And from that, since there was going to be worship, they had their whole mass choir that the Ugandans had brought together for this thing. And so we were able to bring our own worship team, and I was able to lead that team. And we had been leading worship one night and left to go from one village to the next. There was about a 5-kilometer distance between the two villages. And when we were coming in to the second village, I was climbing off the bus. I was the last person on the bus. And as I got off, this Ugandan man stepped in front of me and blocked my way so I couldn't get off. And he said, in the most clear English I've ever heard from a Ugandan, "I want you to know that I walked here from the last village to find you." And I immediately thought, great, what did I do? and what's my exit strategy off this bus? And I said, okay, why are you looking for me? And he said, because you saved me yesterday. And I was like, I've never seen you before. What do you mean I saved you? And he said that the night before, he had decided during the worship time to accept Jesus. And that through that connection that he was feeling during our worship time, he related that to me. And he knew that I wouldn't know that God had used me to reach him. And so he decided to walk the 5 kilometers for the sole purpose of telling me that God had used me because he knew I wouldn't know that. And that was kind of a game changer for me. That really set me back. It made me reprocess the whole idea of how we can make a difference, not necessarily to a large group of people, but to one person. And we might not even know that it's happened. And if that can happen to that one person, could it have happened to other people that night that I also don't know about? And it just started my wheels really turning into all that. And it opened me up to the idea of how I might be able to impact the lives of individuals, even if I didn't know I was doing it. And so when I went back from that trip and I talked to my wife about it, and I said, I think I have to go back again next year just so I can find out if this was this first time experience that I'm having, or if I'm really feeling like I need to do something more with my life. And she said, well, that's great, but I'm one who's wanted to go travel the world all these years, so I'm going to be going with you. And that started the process. And so we went together the next year, and then the third year we took our kids to see how well they would do in Uganda and how well Uganda would do with them. And then the fourth year, we stayed for a couple months to experience living there and what that would mean. And then the next year we moved. And so it wasn't one of those things where we just had this aha moment and, oh my gosh, our lives are going to change, we're going to move. It was a process that we went through, but it all started with me being open to even leaving the United States. Mm-hmm. And that has been the beginning of the roller coaster that we've been on since that time.
So it was that third trip that you guys went on where we kind of met. Mm-hmm. So similar, we were at church, and we had been going to the church that Floyd and Tamara's family go into. I bet we hadn't been there 3 or 4 months, my wife Jenna and I had. And it came that time during the Sunday service where they do announcements, and they're announcing the upcoming, I guess, trip to Uganda, and they showed some video. And I'll kind of share this shamefully about myself. This was the time where I thought, oh, it's a great time to read the bulletin and see what's going on in the world. And hey, you know what? Attendance is up. That's good. And, we're having that moment. And I look over, and somebody's on stage talking about Uganda, I guess. I was totally checked out in that moment, honestly. But I look over, and Jenna's crying. I go, you all right there? She goes, I think I'm going to go to Uganda. I went, what? Huh? What's happening? What are you talking about? She goes, I think I'm going to go to Uganda. I think I feel like I'm supposed to go. And I went, you have fun with that one. There is no way anybody's ever getting me to go to Uganda. That is never happening. Because I was a lot like you.
Right.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm fine traveling the world. Mm-hmm. If we're going to the Ritz-Carlton in Paris, right, or the Waldorf in London or something like. But Uganda, where you're going to shower out of a tub of water that may or may not be clean, and whatever you do, don't open your mouth as you pour it out because you could get parasites. And oh, by the way, people die in Africa. That's what I'd kind of perceived. So interestingly enough, she was gung-ho. And it's not something that you just decide you want to go and they let you go. I mean, right, you have to go through weeks and months of training, and obviously, Lord knows how many shots and inoculations and things. And then she was gone for 3 weeks, and away she went. And that was it. And she came back. And when she came back, my life changed. I didn't go. I didn't experience it. But it changed because she had a new perception of life that she brought into our home. Mm-hmm. And I immediately fell in love with Uganda and the people there. And once and then when she got back, she said, you got to meet Floyd and Tamara, who were on the trip with me. And we obviously, because of our stellar personalities, right, and unique characteristics that are so similar, became fast friends. Mm-hmm. And so about the time you guys were leaving, we wanted to be part of what you guys were doing in any way we could, and we're fortunately able to help support through encouragement, prayer, and financially the school that you guys opened in Uganda, that was open to kids of all economic ranges and all of that, and not brought in for any other reason other than to love these kids and give them an education, something that they probably wouldn't be able to get otherwise.
Right.
And then about a year, not even that, 6 months after you guys got there, I got the opportunity to go myself.
That's right.
And I remember when I got the call from the pastor of our church who said, "Hey, I think you're supposed to go to Uganda." I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to have to let you know on that one." And I hung up the phone, and Jenna said, "Yeah, you're going." And I did. And I got to tell you, it was life-changing. And so, little tidbit message to the listeners: go do something like that to impact the lives of others if you ever get the chance. Was it comfortable? No. Did I care? No, I didn't. Because in that moment, your whole life gets put into a whole new level of perspective. Mm-hmm. And there is not a trip in the world that can give you the perspectives and appreciation of what we get to experience here, but also the appreciation for what they have there too, I think.
And I think that people fail to realize the resilience of the human body and the human mind, mm-hmm. and that we can imagine things to be far worse than maybe they really are. And then once we're in that moment, in that situation, we can realize that, this place isn't great. It's not comfortable. I'm not, I don't really want to sleep in a mosquito net. I don't want to have a need for a mosquito net. I don't want to have to squat to use the bathroom. That's just not comfortable. But then you do it a couple of times and you're like, you know what? I feel really safe in this mosquito net. This is actually kind of cool. I think I kind of like this mosquito net. And you start to realize that the things that you feared weren't really worth fearing. Yeah. And it opens up your ability to experience the world in a whole different way. And if more people allowed themselves the ability to do that, I think that our conversations would be a lot more open than they are today.
Well said. I agree. So Uganda was a season. Mm-hmm. And then you came back from that season, recognizing that your work there was done, that you had set up. And something I always appreciated about what you and Tamara said was that we're going to go there to get the school to where it was self-sustaining, mm-hmm. where it didn't need us to stay there, where the people that were there would have jobs, the kids would have the school, and that we could move on to the next project, wherever and wherever that might be.
Right, because if we go and we set up a program that requires us to be there, then what happens when we're no longer available? If I die or if she dies, how does that project continue? How do the lives of those people move forward if it's reliant on my presence? Mm-hmm. And so the only way that you can make something worthwhile is if it's self-sustaining, both financially and with the indigenous people actually taking it over and doing it. And it doesn't mean that they do it the same way you would do it. Most often they don't, but they're doing it. And that's really the ultimate goal, mm-hmm. is that they've taken charge and control of their own lives and their own future and aren't reliant on what has been such a prominent experience, especially in Uganda, which was a British colony, more than 50 years ago. And there's still this inherent cultural belief that Ugandans are just supposed to wait for the white people to bring stuff. And when you empower them to do things on their own, and you start to affect the lives of individuals where they realize they don't have to wait on anyone to do anything. They can actually do it themselves, and they can probably do it better than we could because this is where they're from, and they know their environment, and they know their the different experiences that are necessary to flourish with what they're doing. And when they experience that empowerment, they don't want you to leave, but they don't want you to do it anymore.
Yeah,
because they've got it. And it's a great feeling when they know, and you can see them able to take charge and do it on their own. And that's when you take a step back and say, okay, now what's next? Because they've got this. And that's the ultimate goal.
That's awesome. So you came back and you said, what's next? Mm-hmm. And somehow Cambodia was on the radar.
So as an interesting tidbit, before we left Uganda, we were recognizing that things were really starting to transition at a point that even though we didn't want to leave and they didn't want us to leave, we were getting close to a point where it was going to be time for us to go in order to not hold them back so they could really flourish on their own. And if we stay, they would want to rely on us for certain things that they didn't need to rely on us for. And so we were recognizing that, but we weren't ready to go yet, and we weren't sure what the timing was going to be. And Tamara has always had a heart for the anti-trafficking groups and ministries that work in the world, and keeps up with several of their blogs and different things. And she was looking through and reading some of those, and she came across this logo she hadn't seen before. And she clicked on it, and it took her to a page. And it listed some things, some positions they were needing to fill, and one of them required a degree in business management, which is what my degree is in. And you very, very rarely see in missions especially a requirement for a business management degree. It's usually something more in line with pastoral care or counseling or that kind of stuff. And so she yelled across the room to me, and she goes, "Hey, here's a job that has your degree." And I said, "Really? Where is it?" And she said, "Cambodia." And I said, "Who the heck would ever want to live in Cambodia?"
This is coming from a guy who has been living in Uganda.
We were actually, yeah. So, and so over the course of the next 6 months, Cambodia just started popping up in all these random places. And I really wasn't sure for a while, is Cambodia like that car you buy that you never saw anywhere until you bought it, and now you see that car everywhere you go? Like, where did all these cars come from? Is it just in my mind? Am I unconsciously or subconsciously picking these places out, or are they actually happening for a reason? And the more and more that we would move through life, the more and more Cambodia would just keep putting itself in front. And so I decided to take a faith step and just apply for the job and see what would happen. And they contacted us back and said, absolutely, we want to talk to you. And steps went forward, and next thing we knew, we were being offered a position to move to Cambodia. And I prayed about it for a very long time, and I wasn't really sure if that's really where we were supposed to be. I knew we wanted to stay working in the ministry to help people, and we really wanted to ensure that same strategy of self-sustainability was in the forefront, that we were going to train the indigenous people to ultimately take over, that I was going to replace myself. And this ministry was doing that, and that was their focus and their goal. And I clicked on a video that they had put out years ago. CNN had done a kind of an expose on Cambodia and the sex trafficking rings that were happening there and how that was happening. And I watched a video of a girl who had been rescued. And she was telling her story about how she had been sold by her mother to a brothel for a very low amount of money, dollars. And was being taken to this brothel and was in this brothel for 15 or 20 days, and she was able to get a cell phone, and she called the president or the CEO of Agape International Missions and said, "Here's where I am. Can you come and get me?" And they have a SWAT team, and he said, "Well, I think we can, but it's going to take us 2 days because they have to coordinate everything with the local police." And the danger with coordinating with the local police is that some of the local police are on the payroll of some of these brothels.
So the brothels are not legal.
Well, they are, and this is kind of a long dip into how things work in Cambodia. But they have places called KTVs, which are basically karaoke studios, right? And they'll be 8 or 9 stories tall. There'll be 80 rooms, all very lavish and full of these big screen TVs and 2,000 songs you can sing in English and all these girls. And when you walk in, all these girls come forward and they all have numbers on their outfits, and you choose the girls you want, and then they go with you into the karaoke room, and you have to buy a case of beer, and you pay $50 for the room, and then you can basically do whatever you want in those rooms with these girls, with the exception of having sex. That has to be negotiated before that can take place, but everything else is on the table. And then they have massage parlors, and the massage places, you'll see them as you drive by, they'll say, $5 for a massage. And you'll go in, and it is a $5 massage, but it's all there. It's ultimately that low price because they're offering other services. And some of the women that are in these places are underage, and some of them aren't. And so none of it, trafficking is illegal. Prostitution is illegal in Cambodia. But because of the way that they're set up and the way that they are hidden, and then because of the level of corruption that can take place in the government, they flourish, and it's kind of one hit at a time trying to get these places shut down. But so I'm watching this video of this girl telling her story, and so After the 22 days that she spent in this brothel, and the brothels keep very accurate records of how many men were with these girls so that they can track their accounting and how much money they should have. And so it's very, very accurate accounting. And in 22 days, this girl was basically raped 198 times. It's 9 times a day on average. And so I thought about the lives that we had impacted in Uganda, and the children that were getting an education that were getting it before, and the kids that were being fed that weren't being fed before, and how much of an impact that was for their future, that they might not have to just be a farmer like mom and dad, but they could actually be more than that. And I looked at this girl who could have spent her entire youth, she was 14 when she was sold to the brothel, could have spent all those years being raped every single day, 9 or 10, 11 or 12 times a day, but was rescued, and now her life is completely changed and moving forward in a positive direction, that she can even speak about it and share her story with others so that they can find peace in what's happened in their lives. And I thought, what a difference. Not that it's better, but it's just a different impact on a life. You know, that, okay, you don't have to be a farmer anymore. Okay, you don't have to be raped every day. And it just moved me in a way that I said, if this is where God wants us, if this is where he's pushing us, then this is where we're going to go. And now we live there, and now we are fighting the battle every single day. I've been on raids to raid brothels, and I've worked with the girls after the fact when they've come out of rehabilitation and are ready to move on and be reintegrated into life and start working again, working legitimate jobs. And as much as I loved my time in Uganda and still keep track of what's going on there and how everyone is doing, I feel an even deeper level of fulfillment on a daily basis with what we're doing in Cambodia. There's a lot of work to do. It's going to take a long time to get it accomplished, but we're working on it day by day, and progress is happening.
Wow. Man, you know, as a dad of daughters, I'm sitting here listening, and this is not the first time I've heard you tell this story, obviously, because we've had conversations about this, but it doesn't change the fact that as I hear you say this, I just, in my mind, am conflicted, confounded, and dumbstruck that this happens in the world.
If I can add one more little tidbit, is that we find girls and boys. It should be said that there are boys that are found as well. Our ministry focuses primarily on girls, so if we find boys in brothels, there are other ministries that we help get them to that specialize with boys. But we've found them all the way down to 3 years old, being sold by their parents or being trafficked, and also from other countries. If you think about it, sex trafficking wouldn't be an issue if they didn't have customers.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's the biggest part of prevention, right? How do we prevent these girls from being taken, from being bought, and how do we prevent the customer base from fulfilling or having a need for that? And so the biggest problem is that we have so many Westerners, I won't say Americans, but it's Americans too, but Westerners, Europe and those things, that will fly to Asia on a business trip. And really, it's under the guise of finding underage companionship. And they'll pay top dollar for that. And they have rooms that are specifically designated, often called pink rooms, because they're usually painted pink, but they're specifically designated for the virgins. And it's top dollar for those things. And the idea that even in today's society, as intelligent and as technologically advanced as we are, that we still will run people like cattle for our own indulgences is just sad.
Yeah.
To a whole level. But we recently were involved in rescuing a number of girls. In fact, 29, I believe, was the number of girls who we found to be a part of a baby trafficking ring. And what was happening was that they were being artificially inseminated, and that these babies were going to be harvested and sent to China. And whether they were going to be sent to China for slave labor, or if it was for organ harvesting, we're still unsure and unclear as to which of those two that it was. But these girls were promised $10,000 per child, and it was busted, and we were able to save the majority of those girls and their babies and prevent that from carrying on. And it's all being tried and going through a process right now where they're in criminal cases and that kind of thing. So I can't say specifics, but what I can say is that everything that we do is not limited to just sex trafficking. There's cross-border trafficking, there's slavery. There's a number of different caveats that go with ending all types of different forms of trafficking and slavery that happen in this world. And Cambodia, for whatever reason, is this hub where a lot of it is taking place.
Wow. Well, that's heavy, man. But God bless you for the work you're doing. I tell you, I mean, you talk about world changers and people that are making a difference in the lives of others. So the ministry itself isn't just about stopping this. It's about helping these young girls reacclimate into a life that's not inclusive of what they've had to be enduring, right? So talk to me a little bit just quickly about that.
Sure. So there's 4 main pillars, if you will, within the ministry. And the first one is prevention, because if you can stop it from happening in the beginning, you don't have to worry about the rest of it, right?
Right.
So prevention includes an elementary school, which we are just getting ready to open our new elementary school building, which will be able to handle about 1,500 kids ultimately. Right now we're spread out in about 5 buildings, and it's around 400 kids or so. And so we're excited about that. We have a kickboxing studio to work with men, because a lot of the times these men are the traffickers, right? And so there's stories of guys that we've been able to help who would cross the border from Cambodia into Vietnam every weekend to bring back a couple of girls, and they get paid $2,000 a weekend to bring these girls back into Cambodia. And now they're working for $50 a month doing construction, but they realize that what they're doing is wrong, and then now they're reteaching other Cambodians about why it's wrong. And so kickboxing is a really big thing in Cambodia, and so it's a great way to minister to the men in what's going on there. So that's prevention. Then we have rescue, which is our SWAT team, which goes in and gets these girls or monitors what's happening across the borders and then rescues them. And then they go into an area of rehabilitation where we have secure places where these girls can go, and there are counselors who can work with them. There's some training on future jobs that they can be able to do while they're recovering. But the social work never ends. Even if they leave and are ready to be reintegrated into the world, they have access to social workers till the day they die. Because what happens is life happens, and the next thing you know, you don't have a job or you don't have money, and the easiest thing to say is, well, I know where I can go and get paid, and my family needs me, and so I'll sacrifice myself again to feed my family. But when there's people there you can talk to that can help you with other options, then that helps break the cycle. And so we have that as an availability. And then we have reintegration, which is the primary area that I work in. And that's once these girls are ready to move forward, we put them in on-the-job training to help them learn, whether it's a trade, whether it's a skill, or whatever it is that, one, they like to do or want to do that is attainable within the country. We'll teach them how to do it. And our primary sources of training right now are in textiles and sewing and clothing making and that kind of thing, bracelet, that kind of stuff. And so we have 100 plus girls that are currently working in our employment centers that are learning how to sew, learning how to do things. In fact, if you go into Nordstrom's, you'll find certain sweaters in Nordstrom's that we actually made.
Really?
And they're being sold there. And so we train these girls how to do that. And some of them, we offer the ability, if they're able to read and write. Some of them, we rescue them at 18 years old, and they've never learned how to read or write either English or Khmer, which is their local language. And it's just a little too late in life to be able to get them to a point where they could be an entrepreneur and learn what's necessary to be able to manage a business. But there are some that we get young enough that we can get them to that point, and so we will help them with that. We are just about to open a new culinary school on September 3rd, where we'll teach the girls how to cook and how to work in restaurants, because Cambodia is a huge tourist area. And so there are hotels and restaurants and all kinds of things. So it's a great opportunity for girls to be able to work in those environments and make a decent living. But we also ensure that wherever we're placing them, that it's safe and that they're not going to be re-trafficked in those environments.
Man, wow. It's amazing stuff, man. Thank you for the work you're doing,
I don't look at it as something that I deserve any praise for. I'm filling the niche in the place where I feel like God has put me, and in the same way that someone might work at a 7-Eleven, and that's where God has put them in that time. This is where God has put me, and I don't deserve any glory for it. I just go and do what it is I'm supposed to do every day, and the rest of it, all takes care of itself. So we'll let God have the thanks, and I'll just keep doing what I'm doing.
You're a long way from Slurpees, my friend. I'll tell you that much. Well, listen, if people are listening to this and going, man, I got to get involved in this in any way I can, just to even send letters of encouragement, support, if they want to support what you guys are doing financially, because you guys have to raise your own funds to go over there, live there, do this. This is not something that, hey, I get paid to do what I do. I can't imagine a world that have to live where you guys are, and you have to financially support yourself to do it. It's not there's not enough money in the world to have to experience what you guys are experiencing, and that has to be arguably the most valuable job in the world right now, and you don't get paid to do it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where unemployment in the countries we work in are usually 80% or higher. And so the government's not real keen on you coming in and making money when the locals aren't. And so we do have to raise the money. And so right now we have about 92 different individuals or families that are supporting us financially that helps us to be able to be there and pay bills and do ministry and those kinds of things. And so we're always looking for people who want to jump on and help us. And we have people that support us at $5 a month all the way up to $600 a month, and people that do annual gifts and quarterly gifts and that kind of thing. And so there's always a need. There's always something else that we're needing, or some random thing that's come up that we're like, well, if we had $200, we could do this, and that would make a difference. So if people wanted to find out about the ministry itself, it's Agape International Missions, or AIM, as it's commonly known. You'll see a big lotus flower as the emblem with a lowercase AIM.
Agape, A-G-A-P-E.
Correct. International Missions. And that website is agapewebsite.org.
Okay.
If
Zach,
they want,
we can throw that on this thing, right? Like
we'll figure something out, definitely.
If they want to reach me specifically, my email address is Floyd, Floyd, at agapewebsite.org. And so if you're interested in supporting us financially, if you want to pray for us, if you want to be able to maybe send something, or if you have a desire to purchase T-shirts or Christmas or thank you cards or bracelets or any of the other things that we make in our employment centers that we have for sale that goes to support these girls, reach out to me in that regard. I'm happy to reply and help you with that. So that's the best ways to reach us right now.
Awesome. Manny, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Just real quick, and we're running out of time here, but I wanted people to hear your story because I've heard your story, and I could hear it a dozen more times, and it's going to impact my soul every time that I do. And I think that so oftentimes here in the U.S., we get tied to Twitter and Facebook and CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and whatever to get riled up about what in perspective is the most insignificant stuff ever. You've now lived most of your life in the United States, but now a significant portion of your life in Africa and Asia, not in the nice spots. Overall perception-wise, how has that changed your point of view about America, what we're about, and the rest of the world?
So it's interesting to see the perspective of how the rest of the world views the United States and politics in the United States through their own personal lenses, and the narrative that is shared outside of the U.S. versus what you hear when you are in the U.S. I will say this, that my time in both Uganda and Cambodia has, I won't say awakened me, but it has alerted me to a couple of very important things, I think, for the United States to really pay attention to. One is that inevitably, a third world country is almost always defined by a lack of the civilian population having access to firearms. It's usually removed by the government because that's how the government controls the people, because once they can't defend themselves, they have complete autonomy to do pretty much whatever they want. And so in both of these countries, you'll find that they don't have access to weapons, but many of them have them. In Cambodia, the most recent numbers I saw were that there are about 400,000 civilians have firearms in Cambodia, but only 2,000 of them are registered in a country where owning a firearm as a civilian is illegal.
What's the population?
In Cambodia, I think the total population is around 12 or 15 million.
Okay.
So why would I register if it's illegal? I mean, obviously.
So if you are wealthy and you have something to protect, you can actually request, you can get a permit that allows you, an exception to the rule. And so most notably, people, or if you were in the military, right, you may end up keeping your firearm, but you would register that you have it or whatever else. But the point is that there are more and more deaths happening in Cambodia that are firearm-related deaths by criminals who have firearms. All the good people who are obeying the laws don't have them and can't protect themselves. And if you look through history at the different regimes that have taken over different places, I mean, if you look at even Germany, Hitler removed guns from the people. And if you look at the Jews who survived the Holocaust, if you're willing to acknowledge that there was one in this day and time, the ones who survived the most, who were most predominantly known for surviving, were the ones who got access to firearms and fought back. And it's believed that if the Jews had access to firearms at the time that the Nazis tried to take over, that it would have been a very different story. It's the very reason why the Japanese did not invade the U.S. after Pearl Harbor, because Japanese commanders said, if we do, there will be a gun behind every blade of grass, because we were very well armed in the United States. And so it prevented an invasion on the ground. And so as I hear more and more from the other side of the world, the talk in the U.S. about getting rid of the firearms or controlling them or doing whatever. And there's obviously extremes to one end and the other. The thing I would caution everyone is to be very, very careful about the slippery slope of controlling access to firearms for the civilians, because it is a gateway to governmental control at a level that we don't want, and that our founding fathers specifically wanted to make sure was not going to be allowed to happen. So that's one thing I would say. Another is the level of corruption that we find in governments in the third world countries, and the level of, you were talking before, I think last week, about voting, and that so many people in the U.S. don't actually exercise their right to vote. In Cambodia, and I'll be very careful about what I say, because I can say something that can end up causing me not to be able to go back if I'm not careful. But in Cambodia and Uganda, I'll couple them together. There are countless stories where people have gone to vote, and when they went to their district to vote, they had already voted. And they would say, "What do you mean I've already voted? I'm just here. I don't have the purple thumb, which is the insignia that I've dipped it in the ink and I voted." And they said, "No, your vote's already been cast." In both of these countries, we've had the opposing parties have been both arrested and kicked out and brought up on charges of treason. And so whether ultimately there is no opposing party and they just run uncontested. And if we're not careful in the United States with our lack of desire to give up something that other people cherish, and that we cherished for a long time in this country, that right to vote, and the impact that it can make. So many people feel like their vote doesn't count. They don't really understand the process. They don't understand how it works. But the whole world looks at the United States. Truly, they look at the United States and they say, they gauge how the rest of the world will move based on what's happening in the U.S. And some of this just ridiculous bickering and back and forth between the two parties, and what sometimes can look like an all-out, attempt to hijack the presidency at different points, and to say that it's okay for one side to say this, but not for the other side to say the same thing because it doesn't agree with what it is that we're saying, and that happens on both sides. We look at that from outside and we wonder, one, what's happening to our country? And the rest of the people that we live with there ask us, they say, why are you giving up the things we're still fighting for? Why are you choosing to let go of the very things that we're struggling just to be able to have it all? And I think that Americans have blinders on too much of the time, and allow things to happen and don't say anything or don't express their voice because they think it won't matter, won't change anything. And that's true if nobody does, right? And fortunately, since you brought up the First Amendment, you can actually share your voice for the most part and be heard, and people can respond to that, whether positively or negatively, but they can do it. And there are many other countries in the world where if you were to share your voice, you would find yourself with a pair of concrete shoes sitting at the bottom of the sea. And so I think that it's given us perspective into the appreciation of what we have in the United States, what we've had, and what we're losing if we're not careful as a group of people. You know, the Bible says that in Revelation that as the times are coming to the end, it will be as if the people have completely lost their mind. And sometimes I look at news stories and people and their temper tantrums sometimes that I see on the news, and they just look insane. And it scares me sometimes to see that that's the level that our population is coming to.
Yeah. Wow. Well said, my friend. Listen, it's interesting to get the perspective that you would have from living where you've been. Has maybe your perceptions changed more, or your political viewpoints softened one side or the other? And I don't need to ask specifically where you land on certain political things, but did you maybe before you went to Uganda, before you went to Cambodia, think this is the way that life is, and this is the way I believe, and these are the things I am principled in, and then you have these life experiences outside of the U.S. and go, maybe I wasn't right on that one.
Yeah, I think there are individual cases where that happens, and where you're just really hard-lined on one specific stance, whether it's because you were raised to believe that and continue to do so, or it's something you've come to on your own. And then you go to a place like a Uganda or a Cambodia or anywhere else in the world that doesn't do things the way that we do them. And you look at that and you start holding the U.S. as a bar to everything else. And if you're not careful, what you end up doing is you end up holding everything else as a bar to the United States. And that different perspective causes you to fall in the middle on a lot more stuff. Whereas before you might fall much more on the left or the right. And ask the question of, is this thing worth falling on your sword over? Or is there not some place in the middle that we can meet and actually come to an agreement? And the biggest problem that we have, I think, more than anything, again, going back to the First Amendment, is that in the U.S. you have the ability to share your voice. And that voice multiplied can be heard, and it can actually make a sound that the world can hear. But in places like Uganda and Cambodia, you can't get your voices together because it's illegal to do so. And guys will drive by on trucks with sticks in the back and hit you on the head and knock you out in order to prevent you from protesting. So I would say that I'm not willing to fall on my sword over everything anymore. I don't have the hard line that I had on everything anymore. Some things I do. Some things I just feel very strongly that this is the way that it should or shouldn't be. But I'm more open to the conversation, because without movement, you're just stagnant, and stagnation doesn't ever help anybody.
Couldn't agree more. So this week, interestingly enough, Andrew and I were talking about it as we were coming into the show. In the closing minutes that we have here, we were talking about just what you were just talking about how we as a society here in the U.S. have become so polarized over my political party versus yours, or my belief and principled belief over this one or that one, that not only are we unwilling so oftentimes to hear what the other side has to say, but we're not even listening to the truth anymore either.
Right.
And the truth is undeniable, right?
It's supposed to be.
And by the way, that's not a right or left issue. Both sides are all quick to maybe bend the truth to their own liking, the narrative, so to speak. But I think we misuse the word truth and honesty so much anymore. I was raised, as I know you were, we were both raised out in West Texas. Truth is the truth. There's no variation of that.
Right.
And when it comes to our First Amendment, I think oftentimes, don't we find ourselves here in the U.S. using that as a scapegoat to say whatever we want? And are we not almost taking that for granted for the people in the rest of the world that don't have the right and would say, hey, I would totally be honest all the time if I could, if I were just given the right to speak?
People are strange in that we always want the thing that we can't have, but once we have it, we lose the respect for it. And so I think that as Americans, we do use the First Amendment as our way to say whatever we want, and then we use tolerance as the means for people to have to accept what it is that I'm saying. Unless I don't agree with what you're saying, and then you're not being tolerant to the fact that I don't agree with you. It's such a slippery slope. The First Amendment was put in place so that we would be able to say what was necessary to be said without fearing repercussions from the government or other people. And if someone says something that is untrue or that smears your name, we have legal devices in place, slander and libel, to allow people to get those things corrected. And if necessary, there are punitive damages available for those situations. So as long as the free speech, because there are limitations to it, right? You can't threaten the president, right? That's a limitation to your ability to say something. Mm-hmm. I'm questioning more and more whether or not that's actually being imposed.
There's others, right, Andrew?
There's 9. There's obscenity, fighting words, defamation, which is libel, slander, child pornography, perjury, lying under oath, blackmail, incitement to imminent lawless action, which sounds kind of cool. True threats and solicitations to commit crimes. So can't put on Craigslist.
Right. Right.
Hey, meet me at 5 to knock over the Kroger down the way. It doesn't work.
Right. So there are all these safeguards built in, right, to limit what you can say. What you can say is whatever you want to say, as long as it isn't detrimental to another person, right, or to the government or to whatever, right. And we do use that, guys, as a way to allow us to say whatever we want and say, well, you can't do anything or say anything to me because, First Amendment. But then you have situations where someone uses that First Amendment to say something that you don't think is okay for them to say, doesn't go against any of the things he mentioned on the list, and then you kick them off Twitter or YouTube, or you have them fired, or they have to step down because of the backlash or whatever else.
And then that gets into the hypocrisy of it all, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're referring to Alex Jones,
sure,
who it says some pretty outlandish stuff, no doubt. And I was Bill Maher, comedian, very liberal host of his own show, was mentioned this on his show, who rightfully the audience was pretty filled with sympathizers of liberal policies. And of course, immediately the audience, when he said Alex Jones getting kicked off Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, the crowd went wild and cheers, and Kristen Gillibrand, U.S. Congressman, she did the same. She was good, and then, to the surprise of everybody, I think Bill Maher said, "Is that good?" Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm a liberal, and we're supposed to be for First Amendment right for everybody. Doesn't that mean my emphatic opposition to what you say still means you still have the right to say it?
Unless he's calling for violence or glorifying violence, or because lying, he can lie all he wants. That is totally protected speech. But he was officially violated for using dehumanizing language to describe people who are transgendered, Muslims, immigrants, and for glorifying violence against those parties. Yeah. So that's... He wasn't kicked off for fake news. He was kicked off for glorifying violence.
Yeah, and listen, don't get me wrong. I don't tune into Alex Jones. I've heard snippets of what he's had to say, and there is zero desire for me to ever listen to anything else that he has to say. And I thought what was interesting about that whole play out, though, was that coming to his, I don't want to say coming to his defense, but coming to the defense of the First Amendment was a guy who emphatically opposes everything that he would have to say. And he was practically crucified for it from his own party, his own people, for saying, time out. There can't be a double standard here, which actually made me respect Bill Maher even more, to say, thank you, because we don't see that often anymore.
Right.
I'm emphatically opposed. I'm for the First Amendment so long as you're saying what I want you to say. But as soon as you're not, I'm not so much for the First Amendment anymore.
Right. And, we live in a country where the marketplace is supposed to drive what people want, right? And there's a market for Alex Jones. He's got millions of people who listen to him. I think it's millions who listen to him, and maybe they listen to him for the entertainment value. Maybe they actually buy into what he's saying. I don't know the reasons, but there's a market that wants to hear what he has to say. And if the avenues you want to use, such as a YouTube or whatever, are not conducive to you sharing that viewpoint, there are other avenues that you can go to be able to do that, right? There are plenty of shock jocks and others who have left the networks they were on because they wouldn't let them say what they wanted to say, and moved to an area where they could do that, where they started their own or joined a group that was more open. And I'm not saying that Alex Jones should have to do that. If he's violated the rules of the different groups he's posting on, then they're warranted to do whatever it is that's allowed within the group. But to the particular notion of free speech, if you are being penalized because you say something that is offensive to someone else, and they're afraid that level of quote-unquote fake news is going to cause the people to buy into something that's not true, and that's the reason that they're kicking you off, that in and of itself is just flat wrong. It goes against the reason, the purpose of free speech.
Absolutely.
You concur, Ellsworth?
I do. Yes. The Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, it's not their job to set precedent for free speech, or what they're defining as free speech. That's for the courts. Facebook, YouTube, they have consumer power. That's what it was. Is, hey, we have these rules to make a nice, enjoyable space for our consumers. Doesn't necessarily correlate to safety or what the law pertains to free speech. It's a company, and free speech doesn't always apply in those spaces.
Sure. Yeah. Well, listen, man, thanks for being on the show this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Good to have you here.
I was happy to be able to be here.
I wish you weren't about to fly back, but
How long's that flight?
It's very long, actually. So it's fortunately I'm going to go forward in time. So I'm going to do a little time travel, right? Because we can go forward as we go to Asia. But so it's about 23 hours in the air, but with all the layovers, I don't sleep on the plane, so I'll be up for about 46 hours straight.
Wow.
From bed to bed. So.
Well, God bless you, my friend, and you and Tamara, and the work that y'all are doing, and the boys and Reagan and your whole family, man. You guys are just, I'm in awe of you guys.
Well, we're happy to be able to be used and to serve, and if anybody out there wants to help us do that, we're happy to have that conversation.
We'll make sure to post those. Floyd at agapewebsite.org. Google search agapewebsite.org, and reach out to these folks. Reach out to our show if you have questions. We'll help get you in touch with Floyd if you want to help support the work that they're doing there as well. So big thanks as always to the folks here at Real News Communications. Zach, didn't say much, buddy, but thanks for being part of it.
Man, I wanted to jump in on some stuff, but I was kind of caught up in Floyd's story, and I figured, you know what, maybe we'll take a back seat for the last chunk of this episode. We'll talk about it after the show, though. But
sure.
It'll be good. It's fine. Floyd, great stuff. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Andrew, thanks, buddy.
Thanks
for being here.
Yeah.
As always, a big thanks to my beautiful wife, Jenna, my wonderful daughters, Emerson and Arabella, for making their daddy want to be a little bit different. I'm already a lot different. But making me want to be a little bit different in a positive way and think differently, too. I almost feel like I shouldn't do the Where I Land on this segment because it seems so insignificant given what we talked about today.
You can post it separate.
Well, I'm going to though. And here's why. Because I think what we talked about and what we wrapped up on today really does make us need to think differently about the things that we maybe are taking advantage of here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And that maybe the rest of the world, if they had the opportunities that we had here, would think differently about things and feel like maybe they would have a little bit more of a voice themselves. But I definitely don't want to take away from what we talked about today. This week in the United States, depending on what radio you're dialed into, or TV, cable news show, or blog site, or whatever it is where you get your information, you found yourself in a very unique position of trying to decide things like right and wrong and truth and lies. And while I may be considering a number of things, I do know where I land on this. Honesty and truth is not up for interpretation. Period. My father has a saying: if you always tell the truth, you won't have to remember what you say. Why is that? It's because the truth doesn't change. This past week in America, truth and honesty has come under attack. This isn't a left or right issue, and I really don't care about your party affiliation. The left has been guilty of attempting to redefine the truth. We all remember the whole definition of is debate. And now the Trump administration, or those speaking for it, is doing the same thing by talking about different versions of the truth. No, there aren't different versions of the truth, because the truth is in and of itself its own version. I'm tired of turning on my TV or dialing in my radio station to hear one side defend its own while at the same time berating the other side for the same thing. I may emphatically oppose the opinions or policy preferences of people like Alex Jones, but I defend his right to have a voice, but not the right to tell me lies. We have perverted the rights afforded to us in the First Amendment by using those rights as our ability to lie. All this while in other parts of the world they long for the simple right just to get to speak out. In Indonesia this week, a woman was publicly caned for speaking in a manner critical of her government. It makes you take a second and realize how blessed we really are here for our ability to debate in this country. That you and I are allowed to have a differing opinion than those of the other, than that of the government, than our church, than your neighbor, and that we can go to the bar or go to Twitter or host a podcast, or hold up a sign on the side of the road and shout from the top of our lungs, I have an opinion and it is different from yours. Yes, this can lead to some hot tempers and hurt feelings, and I know that it can be difficult sometimes. It can make your skin crawl to hear someone we know is wrong to our core. Not fake news, not spin, but just a flat-out lie or a message of hate. But our ability to speak out is necessary. It's one of the greatest gifts of our Constitution. But when we speak in a manner that jeopardizes the definition and value of the truth, we begin to devalue our voice and our rights. When this devaluing comes from our leaders, regardless of their party, we find ourselves headed, I fear, in a very dire direction. It is necessary that we endure the small evils that freedom of expression can indeed create for the greater benefit of true freedom. We must allow the Alex Joneses of our world to spout their opinion, as in the same manner it affords the justices of our Supreme Court to do the same, as their rights and opinions are both weighed as equal. Not your gender, not your race, not your opinion on the best ice cream, pinch hitter versus designated hitter, preferred political affiliation, or whether or not we landed on the moon will ever affect the ability you have to march to the steps of Congress and share your voice. However, when fact is separated clearly from fiction, there is no longer a debate. There's just truth. When we would rather have a comfortable lie than an ugly truth, we have traded our freedom for selfishness. There's no middle ground when it comes to the truth. Not finding myself anywhere near the middle on this one. I'm Seth Denson.